The metallic corridors of the neutral space station hummed quietly, filled with the faint echoes of distant machinery. Dr. Alan Carter, a human medic known for his skill and compassion, was tidying up his small clinic after a long day. The station was a melting pot of alien species, each carrying their own unique problems, but tonight had been oddly quiet. Alan welcomed the peace, unaware of the storm about to enter his life. Suddenly, the clinic door slid open with a hiss. Alan looked up and froze. A tall, cloaked figure staggered inside, leaning heavily on the doorframe. The figure's steps were unsteady, and with each movement, drops of dark, shimmering blood fell onto the clinic floor. "Help," the figure muttered, her voice faint but sharp with urgency. Alan rushed forward, catching her before she collapsed. As the cloak slipped from her head, he saw her face, a stunning yet alien visage, with glowing lines etched into her skin like living tattoos. Her eyes, large and deep violet, locked onto his for a moment, filled with pain and defiance. She wasn't just any alien. She was from the Arzathian Empire, a race infamous for their arrogance and power. But there was something different about her, something vulnerable. "You're hurt," Alan said, guiding her gently to the nearest medical bed. "No questions," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Just fix me." Alan hesitated for a moment. He had treated all kinds of patients before, but this was different. Her injuries were severe. Laser burns scorched her side, and fragments of alien metal were embedded in her arm. Yet her tone wasn't a plea. It was a command, the voice of someone used to authority. He nodded. "All right, but you need to stay still. This is going to hurt." As he worked, Alan's curiosity gnawed at him. The glowing patterns on her skin pulsated faintly, almost as if they were alive. He wanted to ask questions, to understand who she was and what had happened, but the exhaustion in her eyes held him back. Instead, he focused on his task, carefully removing the metal shards and sealing the wounds with a portable regenerator. "You're lucky you made it here," Alan said, breaking the silence. "A few more hours and you might not have survived." She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. But when Alan glanced up, he caught a flicker of something in her expression. Gratitude, hidden beneath layers of pride. As he finished wrapping her wounds, she sat up abruptly, wincing in pain. "I need to leave." "You're in no condition to go anywhere," Alan replied firmly. "You'll pass out before you reach the door." Her eyes narrowed. "If I stay, they'll find me. And if they find me, you'll regret ever helping me." Before Alan could ask who they were, the distant sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. The woman's expression hardened, and she reached for a concealed weapon. Alan stepped back, his heart racing. Whoever she was, trouble had followed her. And now, it had found him too. The heavy footsteps outside grew louder, echoing ominously through the clinic's metal walls. Alan's pulse quickened. He wasn't used to danger. His life as a medic was spent saving lives, not dodging blasters. But now, he was caught in something far beyond his understanding. The alien woman sat on the edge of the bed, her glowing eyes darting toward the door. She gritted her teeth as she reached for her weapon, a sleek, curved blade shimmering with an otherworldly blue light. Alan noticed her hand trembling, not just from pain, but from exhaustion. "You can't fight them like this," Alan whispered, his voice low but firm. "If they're after you, hiding is your best chance." Her gaze snapped to him, sharp and distrustful. "Why would you help me? You don't even know who I am." Alan sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "I don't care who you are. You're injured, and I'm a medic. That's all that matters right now." She studied him for a moment, her eyes softening just slightly. Then, with a reluctant nod, she allowed Alan to help her to her feet. He guided her toward a small storage room at the back of the clinic. It wasn't much, but it would hide her from view. "Stay here," Alan said, closing the door softly. "I'll deal with whoever's outside." Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "If they catch me, they'll kill you too." Alan hesitated, feeling the weight of her warning. "Then let's make sure they don't catch you." Before she could argue, the clinic door slammed open. 3 towering figures stepped inside, their dark armor gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Their helmets bore the insignia of the Arzethian Empire, a silver crest shaped like a burning star. Alan's stomach sank. These weren't ordinary soldiers, they were elite enforcers. One of them stepped forward, his deep mechanical voice cutting through the tense silence. "We are searching for a fugitive, a female of royal descent. She is wounded and may have sought shelter here." Alan kept his expression neutral, forcing himself to stay calm. "This is a clinic. I treat anyone who needs help, but I haven't seen anyone like that." The enforcer's helmet tilted slightly, as if studying him. "We will search the premises." Alan stepped in front of them, his heart pounding. "With all due respect, this is a medical facility. You can't just barge in and start tearing the place apart. You'll destroy my equipment." The lead enforcer loomed closer, his shadow swallowing Alan in its size. "Interference will be met with punishment, human." Alan swallowed hard, refusing to back down. "If you damage my clinic, you'll be violating the neutrality laws of this station. Do you really want to answer to the council?" There was a tense pause before the enforcer stepped back. "You have one warning. If we find you're lying, you'll face the consequences." The soldiers left, but Alan's relief was short-lived. Behind the storage room door, the alien woman, Princess Syra, emerged, her face pale but determined. "You risked everything for me," she said quietly. "Why?" Alan shrugged. "Because someone has to. Now, tell me who you really are, and why they're hunting you." Her glowing eyes met his, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. "I'm Princess Zyra, the daughter of King Rathar, and I'm rebelling against my father's tyranny." Alan leaned against the counter of his clinic, trying to process what Princess Zyra had just revealed. She stood before him, her proud posture faltering for a moment as the weight of her confession settled. The daughter of the Arzethian king, rebelling against her own father's rule. It sounded like a tale from a holo novel, but the determination in her glowing eyes told him it was the truth. "Why are you rebelling against your father?" Alan asked, breaking the silence. "Isn't he the ruler of one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy?" Zyra hesitated, as if debating how much to reveal. Finally, she sighed and sat down, her exhaustion visible despite her strong demeanor. "Power isn't everything. My father's rule has brought nothing but suffering to countless worlds. He's ruthless, destroying anyone who dares defy him. I couldn't stand by and watch anymore." Alan crossed his arms, his curiosity piqued. "And that's why they're hunting you." She nodded. "I tried to unite with the resistance group, but they were ambushed before I could reach them. My father's forces won't stop until they find me. And anyone who helps me." Alan frowned. "So I guess that makes me a target now." Zyra's eyes softened slightly. "I didn't ask for your help, human. You could have turned me away." Alan smirked, his tone light despite the tension. "Well, I guess I'm not very good at looking the other way. Besides, you didn't exactly give me much choice when you collapsed on my floor." For the first time, a faint smile tugged at the corners of Tyra's lips. It was brief, but it made her seem less like an untouchable royal, and more like someone struggling to find her way. Alan noticed the change and felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was more to her than the hardened rebel she tried to portray. "Your wounds are healing, but you're not ready to fight," Alan said, shifting back into his role as a medic. "You need rest, and you need food." Zyra raised an eyebrow. "And where do you plan to get food? This station isn't exactly known for its hospitality." Alan grinned. "Leave that to me. Stay here and don't move. If anyone comes, hide. I'll be back soon." Before Zyra could protest, Alan slipped out of the clinic. The station's bustling marketplace wasn't far, and Alan quickly gathered supplies, including rations and a small energy pack to help with her recovery. His mind raced as he thought about the danger they were both in, but he pushed the fear aside. For now, she needed him. When he returned, he found Syra standing by the window, staring at the stars. Her shoulders were tense, as if the weight of her decisions were crushing her. Alan set the supplies on the counter and called out, "Dinner's here, princess." She turned, and for a moment, the walls she had built around herself seemed to crack. "Thank you, Alan, for everything." Alan shrugged. "It's what I do. But if we're going to survive this, we need to work together." Syra nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Then let's survive." The station's dim lights flickered as Alan and Syra sat quietly in the clinic, sharing a simple meal from the supplies he had brought. The tension between them had eased slightly, though the weight of their situation lingered heavily in the air. Syra, though still cautious, seemed more at ease in Alan's presence. "You've risked too much for me," she said after a while, her voice soft but serious. "If they find me here, they'll kill you." Alan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I've already accepted that. But sitting around and doing nothing isn't an option. Besides, I've faced my share of trouble before." Syra tilted her head, studying him. "You're either brave or foolish, human. Maybe both." Before Alan could respond, a sudden blaring alarm shattered the quiet. Red emergency lights flashed through the clinic's windows, and a metallic voice echoed over the station's intercom. "Attention! Our Zethian enforcers are conducting a sweep. All residents must remain in their quarters." Alan's heart sank as he quickly moved to the window. Outside, heavily armed enforcers were patrolling the station, scanning every corner. He turned to Syra, whose calm expression had hardened into one of pure determination. "They're getting closer," she said, standing up despite the obvious strain on her body. "We need to leave. Now." Alan shook his head. "You're in no condition to run. If we go out there, they'll catch us in minutes. Staying here isn't an option either," Syra replied sharply. "They'll search this place sooner or later." Alan clenched his fists, his mind racing. Finally, he grabbed a small bag and began stuffing it with medical supplies. "Fine, but we'll need to be smart about this. I know a few maintenance tunnels that might get us out unnoticed." Syra gave a single nod, grabbing her blade and wrapping her cloak tightly around herself. "Lead the way." The two slipped out the back door of the clinic and into the narrow, dimly lit maintenance corridors. The air was thick with tension as the sounds of heavy boots and shouted orders echoed above them. Alan led Syra through a maze of pipes and service tunnels, his heart pounding with every step. Suddenly, a faint whirring sound caught his attention. He froze, motioning for Syra to stop. A small drone hovered around the corner, scanning the area with a glowing red beam. "Stay behind me," Alan whispered, his voice barely audible. He reached for a nearby pipe, and with precise aim, hurled it at the drone. The pipe struck its sensor, sending the machine spiraling to the ground in a shower of sparks. "Nice throw," Syra murmured, a hint of approval in her tone. They continued moving, but the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Alan's chest tightened as they neared the station's docking bay. Just as they reached the exit, a group of enforcers spotted them, their weapons raised. "Run!" Alan shouted, grabbing Syra's hand and sprinting toward the shadows. Syra stumbled but kept pace, her strength returning in bursts. As they darted through the chaos, Alan couldn't help but think that they were now not just running for her life, but for his as well. Alan and Syra sprinted through the dimly lit corridors of the station, their breaths loud in the silence. Behind them, the sound of enforcers shouting orders and boots pounding against metal floors grew closer. Alan's heart raced, but he didn't dare look back. His focus was on the fragile but determined alien woman at his side. "Do you even know where we're going?" Syra asked between sharp breaths, her voice edged with frustration. "I got a plan," Alan replied, though in truth, he was improvising. He had mapped out some of the station's lesser-used paths during his time there, but he wasn't sure how long they could keep ahead of their pursuers. As they rounded a corner, Alan spotted a narrow maintenance hatch on the wall. He yanked it open and gestured for Xyra to enter. In here, she hesitated for a split second, her pride clearly battling with the idea of crawling into such a confined space. But the sound of approaching enforcers left no time for argument. She ducked inside, and Alan followed, pulling the hatch shut behind them. The cramped tunnel was dark and suffocating, lined with pipes that hissed with steam. Alan had to crouch to move, and Xyra's glowing patterns faintly illuminated the space ahead. They moved slowly, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick metal walls. "This isn't exactly the escape route I had in mind," Xyra muttered, glancing over her shoulder. Alan smirked despite the tension. "It's not glamorous, but it'll get us closer to the docks without being spotted. Trust me." For a while, the tunnel was silent except for the occasional drip of water. Alan couldn't help but notice how Xyra moved with a mix of grace and fatigue. She was clearly a warrior, but the injuries she had suffered were taking their toll. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I'm fine," she replied curtly, but Alan caught the slight tremble in her voice. They emerged from the tunnel into a small, abandoned cargo bay. The space was cluttered with crates and broken machinery, giving them plenty of cover. Alan motioned for Xyra to sit while he scouted the area. "We're getting closer to the docks," he said as he returned. "There's an old shuttle bay ahead, but it looks like it hasn't been used in years. If we can reach it, we might be able to find a ship and get off this station." Xyra raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think I'm going to let you come with me, human?" Alan chuckled. "Let me? I'm the one getting you out of here. Besides, if you leave me behind, I'll just end up getting arrested for helping you. So, like it or not, we're stuck together." For the first time, Xyra let out a quiet laugh, though it quickly faded. "Fine. But if we get caught, it's on you." Alan grinned. "Deal. Now let's move before they catch up." As they slipped out of the cargo bay and into the shadows, Alan felt a strange sense of resolve. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was determined to see this through, no matter what it cost. The old shuttle bay was just as Alan had hoped, silent and abandoned, tucked away behind layers of forgotten crates and dust. The air smelled of rust and disuse, but it was the perfect hiding place for the moment. They crept inside, their footsteps careful against the creaky metal floor. Xyra leaned against a large crate, her face tired but determined. Alan took a deep breath, his mind racing. They had made it this far, but they weren't safe yet. The enforcers would still be searching for them, and once they figured out Xyra's true identity, things would only get worse. He needed a plan. "There's a control panel up ahead," Alan muttered, pointing to a dusty terminal against the wall. "If I can get it working, we can access the docking system and find a ship to leave this place." Xyra nodded, her expression unreadable. She stepped closer, her glowing skin dimming slightly in the low light. "I don't trust that they haven't already locked down the docks." Alan turned to her, a faint smile on his face. "I've dealt with worse. Trust me." Xyra stared at him for a long moment. "You've been very helpful, human. I didn't expect that. But don't forget, I'm not your responsibility." Alan looked at her, his smile fading. "Maybe not, but you're not alone in this, Xyra. You said you're fighting against your father's empire. I can't just sit back and let you face this alone." Xyra's violet eyes softened for a brief second. It was hard to tell if she appreciated his words or if it made her uncomfortable. "You really don't understand, do you?" Alan frowned. "Understand what?" Xyra sighed deeply, her shoulders sagging. "This isn't just about my father's empire. It's not even just about the rebellion. It's about everything I've lost. Everything I've seen in the name of duty. I'm the princess, Alan. I'm supposed to be perfect, untouchable. But I'm not. I can't escape what I was born into. Alan stepped closer, his voice calm. I don't care about who you were. I care about who you are now. And right now, you're a person I'm helping. Nothing more, nothing less. Thyra looked at him for a long time, and for the first time, the hardness in her face seemed to melt away. She took a slow, steady breath. I'm not used to this. People don't help me. They fear me. They either want to use me, or they want to destroy me. Alan reached for her arm, his grip gentle. I'm not afraid of you, Thyra, and I'm not helping you to get anything in return. I'm just helping because I want to. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, something shifted. A crack in the walls she'd built around herself. Maybe it was the shared risk of their escape, or the trust she'd begun to feel. But Sarah finally nodded, as if accepting something she hadn't fully understood before. Thank you, she said softly. Alan gave a small nod. Let's get you out of here. Together. With renewed determination, Alan moved toward the control panel, fingers flying across the dusty keys. As the terminal hummed to life, he knew that they were close to freedom, but also that the road ahead would only grow harder. But for the first time, he didn't mind the challenge. He wasn't in this alone anymore, and neither was she. The control panel flickered to life with a soft peep, its green light casting an eerie glow on the walls of the abandoned shuttle bay. Alan leaned forward, his fingers moving swiftly over the keyboard, navigating through the old system. His heart raced with each passing second. They were so close to getting off the station, but something told him they weren't going to get a clean escape. Thyra stood behind him, her eyes scanning the shadows, every muscle tense as if ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. The tension between them was palpable, each of them knowing the stakes. They're not far behind, she said quietly, her voice filled with urgency. My father's men are relentless. They won't stop until they have me. Alan didn't look up from the panel, but nodded. He understood. Every step of this plan had been filled with risk, and now they were down to their last chance. He had to make this work. I got access to the docking bay, Alan said, his voice tight with concentration. But it's going to take a few more minutes, Toe. Before he could finish, a loud crash echoed through the bay. The sound of heavy boots thudding against metal floors came next. Zyra's eyes widened, and she grabbed Alan's arm, pulling him back from the terminal. They're here, she hissed. We don't have much time. Alan cursed under his breath, moving swiftly toward a nearby stack of crates. We need to move now. If they find us here, it's over. Zyra didn't hesitate. She darted toward the shadows, and Alan followed her, heart pounding. They crouched behind the crates, listening to the sounds of approaching soldiers. The enforcers were getting closer. He could hear their low murmurs, their footsteps almost synchronized. They were searching for something or someone. They'll find us if we stay here, Zyra whispered urgently, her eyes darting around the room. We have to move. Alan's mind raced. There was nowhere to hide, and the only way out was through the shuttle bay. But he couldn't just run. He had to get Zyra to safety. And fast. I'm going to create a distraction, Alan said, glancing at Zyra. You head for the shuttle bay doors. I'll catch up. No, you're not staying behind. Zyra snapped, her voice firm. I won't let you get caught. Before Alan could protest, she stepped out from behind the crates, her blade drawn and her posture ready for a fight. She was the princess of an empire, but here, in this moment, she was just another warrior fighting for survival. Zyra moved quickly, her glowing skin almost blending with the shadows as she crept toward the entrance. Alan took a deep breath, then reached for a small explosive device he had found earlier. It wasn't much, but it would be enough to throw their pursuers off their trail. With the device in hand, Alan set it near the corner of the bay and triggered the timer. He then followed Zyra, his heart in his throat as the countdown began. They needed just a few more seconds. The explosion was deafening. A flash of light erupted from the far corner of the bay, sending the enforcers scrambling. Alan and Xyra didn't wait. They sprinted toward the shuttle bay doors, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the chaos they had caused. As they reached the doors, Alan turned to Xyra, his breath heavy. "We're almost there." But the worst was yet to come. The shuttle bay doors loomed ahead, their metallic surface cold and unforgiving. Alan's heart pounded in his chest as he and Xyra neared them, their footsteps echoing through the narrow hallway. The sound of the explosion still rang in their ears, but there was no time to stop. They had to keep moving. If they were going to escape, it had to be now. Xyra glanced back over her shoulder, her glowing eyes scanning the shadows. "We're not alone. They'll be coming for us." Alan didn't need to be told. He could already hear the enforcers shouting, their voices growing louder as they regained their composure after the distraction. They were closing in fast. "Just a little further," Alan urged, his voice tight. "Stay with me." The doors of the shuttle bay were almost within reach, but the last stretch was the most dangerous. There were no more shadows to hide in, and the wide open space between them, and the exit felt like a trap. Alan's eyes darted to the control panel beside the door. It was locked, but with a few quick movements, he could override the system. Xyra was already ahead of him, her blade held in a defensive position, ready for whatever came next. Alan took a deep breath, trusting her to cover him. He turned back to the panel, his fingers flying over the keypad. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked quickly, his mind focused entirely on getting the door open. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, too close for comfort. He could hear their voices now, the enforcers calling out orders, splitting up to search the area. Come on, Alan fought, his pulse racing. Every second felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the door slid open with a soft hiss, the harsh light of the shuttle bay spilling in front of them. Alan didn't wait for a second invitation. He grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her through the door, into the open bay. They were out in the open now, exposed, but there was no turning back. "Get to the ships," Alan shouted, his voice desperate. Xyra nodded and ran ahead, her body moving with a fluid grace as she darted toward a small, unmarked ship tucked in the far corner of the bay. Alan followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. As they neared the ship, Alan heard the unmistakable sound of boots pounding on the metal floor. The enforcers had found them. "Get in," Xyra shouted as she reached the ship's entrance, her voice filled with urgency. Alan didn't hesitate. He climbed aboard, but as he reached the door, he heard the unmistakable voice of a commanding officer, cold and filled with fury. "Don't let them escape," the officer yelled. The ship's engines hummed to life as Xyra activated the controls, but the sound of blaster fire filled the air, and Alan felt the ship jolt as the first shot struck. The shields held, but barely. They had no time to waste. "We need to go, now," Alan shouted. Xyra slammed the throttle forward, and the ship lurched into the air. The bay doors slid open in front of them, revealing the dark expanse of space. The enforcers were still firing, but Sarah expertly maneuvered the ship, dodging the blasts as they shot out of the bay and into the stars. As the station shrank behind them, Alan felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. They had escaped for now, but their journey was far from over. "We're not out of danger yet," Xyra said, her voice steady, but her face betraying the exhaustion she felt. Alan nodded, glancing at her. "But we're free for the moment, and that's enough." As the stars stretched out before them, Alan couldn't help but wonder what awaited them in the vast unknown. But one thing was certain. They had each other's backs now, and that was all that mattered. The hum of the ship's engines filled the small cockpit as Alan and Xyra soared through the empty vastness of space. The station they had escaped from was now a distant dot, and the stars ahead stretched endlessly in all directions. But despite the quiet, there was an uneasy tension that clung to the air between them. Alan stared out the window, the stars reflecting in his eyes. He had always dreamed of space travel, but this wasn't how he imagined it. He wasn't here by choice, and his mind raced with questions about what would happen next. They had escaped, yes, but they were still fugitives, and Syra's rebellion wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Zedera sat in the pilot's seat, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls, but Alan could see the exhaustion in her posture. Her once strong demeanor had cracked during their escape, revealing the weight of her situation. "We're safe for now," Syra said, her voice quieter than usual. "But they won't stop looking for us. I can't hide forever." Alan nodded, though he didn't know how to reassure her. "You've made it this far. I'm sure we can figure out the next step." Clara glanced at him, her violet eyes softening slightly. "You don't get it, human. My father's empire is vast. They'll track us down no matter where we go. We can't outrun them forever." Alan sat down beside her, his mind working through the possibilities. "So what's your plan?" Zedera didn't answer immediately. She seemed to be considering something important. Then, after a long pause, she spoke. "I didn't want you involved in this. You've helped me more than anyone ever has, and I owe you more than I can say." Alan furrowed his brow, his heart quickening. "You don't owe me anything, Syra. I did what anyone would have done." Zera shook her head, her voice firm. "No, you risked your life for me. You didn't have to. That's why I'm offering you a choice. I can help you, Alan. I can make sure you're rewarded for everything you've done for me." Alan frowned. "Rewarded? I didn't help you for a reward." Zera turned in her seat, looking at him directly. Her gaze was serious, but there was something else in her eyes, something vulnerable. "I'm not just talking about money or power. I'm offering you something more. The people I'm fighting for, the rebellion. We need allies. And you, Alan, you've already shown me your loyalty. You've shown me what you're capable of." Alan felt a mix of confusion and curiosity. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you're willing," Syra continued, her voice low but strong, "you can join us. You can be a part of something bigger than yourself. I can give you a place in the rebellion, a role that will change the course of history. I can offer you my protection, and more importantly, I can make sure you're safe, truly safe." For a moment, Alan was silent, his mind racing. He had never imagined anything like this, joining a rebellion, fighting against an empire. It seemed impossible, yet he couldn't ignore the pull he felt toward her cause. He had seen what Syra was up against, and despite her royal background, she was just a person, someone who had fought for what she believed in. And maybe, just maybe, he could help her fight for the future she dreamed of. "I'm in," Alan said, his voice steady. "I'll help you, Syra, whatever it takes." Syra's expression softened, a slight but genuine smile forming on her lips. "Thank you, Alan. You don't know what this means to me." Alan met her gaze, his heart swelling with a strange sense of purpose. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. And whatever the future held, they would face it together. The stars outside the ship's window seemed to stretch on forever, a glittering sea of possibilities. Alan sat quietly, watching the lights of distant worlds flicker in the vast emptiness of space. Beside him, Syra was focused on the controls, her hand steady as she navigated the ship through the stars. It had been days since their escape, and the adrenaline had worn off. Now, they were left with the harsh reality of what came next, a rebellion against an empire, a fight for freedom, and the risk of everything they had known being turned upside down. Alan felt the weight of it all, but there was something different now. Something had changed in him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a difference, standing up for something greater than himself. He wasn't just helping a princess anymore. He was becoming a part of her world, her cause. Zara seemed to sense his thoughts without needing to say anything. She turned her head slightly, catching his eye, and for the first time, there was no defiance in her gaze, only something close to gratitude. "You don't have to do this," Zara said quietly, breaking the silence. "You could turn back, leave this all behind." Alan shook his head, his voice steady. "I made a choice, Zara. I'm with you, for better or worse." She gave a small nod, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. "You're a stubborn one, aren't you?" "I get that from my mother," Alan said with a grin. Zara's smile grew a little wider. "Then I'm lucky to have you on my side." They shared a quiet moment before Zara turned her attention back to the controls. Alan watched her for a few moments, considering everything that had brought them to this point. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a revolutionary, he was just a medic. But now, he was something more. He was someone who had chosen to stand by a cause, to fight for a future where people weren't oppressed by the weight of power. "What's our next move?" Alan asked, his voice breaking the silence again. Zara exhaled slowly, her eyes scanning the navigation screen. "We'll need to reach the outer rim. There's a hidden base there, far from the Empire's reach. It's where the rebellion is gathering, preparing for the next phase. If we can get there, we'll have a chance to regroup, to plan our next move." Alan nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was saying. The rebellion wasn't just about fighting an enemy. It was about building something new. And the road ahead would be long, filled with uncertainty and danger. But for the first time, Alan didn't feel afraid. He was in this, fully and completely, and he wasn't alone. "We'll get there," Alan said confidently. "Together." Zara looked at him, her eyes softening. "Together," she agreed. As the ship continued its journey through the endless expanse of space, Alan couldn't help but feel a sense of hope growing inside him. There was so much to be done, so many battles to fight. But with Zara by his side, and the rest of the rebellion, they had a chance. And maybe, just maybe, they could change the galaxy for the better. For the first time since their escape, Alan felt like they were on the brink of something new, something bigger than anything they had ever known. And that, he realized, was the greatest reward of all.